Today's guest on a Life and a Living podcast is Peter Rawlinson, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for an organization called Vivo, based in Ireland, but is having a very, very significant global reach. And what Vivo do is that they've created an employee communication platform that is really all about communicating, connecting, and engaging. And the purpose that Vivo has given themselves is to improve the working experience of every employee on the planet, which is quite an objective that they set for themselves. But they're really doing it, and they're making a huge difference. And the impact it's having on organizations where they've introduced the platform has been quite spectacular. And Pete talks about that during the podcast. But we talk a lot about the changing face of the workplace, where the remote working, people choosing to remote, people wishing to continue to have a hybrid of working from home and working in the office. But we also talk about the challenge that faces, that brings that for leaders in the organization in terms of how they manage that, how they actually do it, how they actually are leaning into doing that in the right way without appearing to micromanage. And we also talk a lot about, getting that balance right between coaching and managing people in that environment. And certainly one of the things that comes very, very clear is that there is a great desire for people to have the hybrid version, which opens up the marketplace hugely for the employer in terms of reach, but also for the employee in terms of options and how we actually manage that. And we talk about the ROI that organizations can enjoy as a consequence of implementing Vivo. So it's a really interesting conversation. It's a very timely conversation in terms of the changing face of the workplace, because we're all facing into somewhat unknown. We have an idea what it might look like, but we're all kind of building it as we go forward. So I really encourage you to listen to Pete. He's got a lot of great points to make, and I think he's got some really interesting observations to make on that as well, that is of value to all employers of people. So tune in and listen to that. If you want to get other interesting interviews, then go to the website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com. If you want to reach out and have a chat, you can get me through the website, or you can contact me at john@johnmurphyinternational.com. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy the conversation with Peter Rawlinson. Pete, you're very welcome to a Life and a Living podcast. I'm delighted to have you here. I've been trying to get you on here for a while, so it's great to finally make it.
It's good to be here, John. Thank you.
Can I just touch on, before we actually talk about Vivo, you just mentioned that, your title is Chief Marketing Officer, but your background is a physicist. That's quite a leap from being a physicist to a Chief Marketing Officer. Now, maybe, I don't know whether I'm insulting the marketing or the physicist in that comment, or both, but it's an unusual leap.
Yeah, what's very interesting as well is the company I'm with right now, Vivo. John Goulding is the CEO, and he is a nuclear physicist as well. So the CEO and the CMO of this company are both nuclear physicists, which is very, very interesting. But yeah, I qualified in the UK as a physicist, and I worked in the nuclear reactors for the first few years. And it's probably longer than this podcast to talk to you about that journey. But I wound up going through product marketing, product management. And now I've ended up as a head marketing guy. So yeah, a very convoluted journey, but an enjoyable one.
So you've seen the light. You've seen the light. So tell us the story of Vivo, because the purpose, as you say, of Vivo is to improve the working experience of every employee on the planet. Now that's some objective and some purpose to have. But maybe talk about the background and also just to elaborate on the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely, John. I mean, it needs to happen, right? Even before the pandemic, the lack of engagement through employees through our businesses was pretty atrocious levels. On average, 70% of businesses would report problems with employee engagement around the world, and that relates to low productivity, low morale. It completely stymies creativity, reduces competitiveness in organizations. The company was founded by John Goulding and Joe Lennon, who'd been in the HR tech space for some time and had experienced this, this real problem with engagement, and also problem with a plethora of different communication tools out there that was kind of confusing employees. Often employees were using shadow IT and using WhatsApp to communicate, confidential corporate information. So they hit on a pretty unique approach to not only enabling more optimized internal communication within organizations, but also communication which is designed to engage employees as well, to connect employees, to make employees feel part of something bigger than they are, that real feeling of community. So 3 years ago, they founded Vivo, a technology company that we provide an employee communication platform that's very much based on very familiar kind of social media experience that brings people together, enables people to post content onto activity feeds, to share, like, comment on that content as you would on a social media platform that you're familiar with. But it's also been built with business in mind. So you can, for example, recognize peers or recognize teams. There are collaboration spaces in there with people of like interests can share content. And it integrates with all of the major applications and resources within your organization. So really our platform is, if you think about the next generation of the intranet, that central town hall where people come together to commune and to access resources within the organization. That's effectively what we're.
And I mean, is it just purely for that social part, or do you integrate the kind of the work piece into it as well, so that if I'm collaborating with somebody else in the organization on a project or initiative, that we're actually sharing documents? It's not just a kind of a social media space, or is it not?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think we found it really important, and it comes back to the kind of the psychology of the human being, that you should be able to mix in personal interests and professional interests, So, we have these collaboration spaces where you can have things like corporate social responsibility space, or you can have a space for a particular project where you can share documents and share, ideas. It's a very good kind of idea creation mechanism where you can just randomly type out kind of, I think we should do this, and it hits lots of people at the same time. But also we have organizations where there is a book club. There is a pet association club. We have one here called Vivo, and so people of common interest can share as well. But yeah, absolutely, it's just as important to support the professional side as the personal side. So yeah, we do collaboration. We also integrate with third-party collaboration tools like Google Docs, like Office 365, etc., SharePoint. So we do have a kind of a best of breed integration philosophy as well.
And I'm just curious, because I mean, if you look at what you're talking about there, and you talk about the whole purpose of engagement and making it a better experience, and of course here we are talking, and we're still in the throes of the pandemic. So, what impact has that had on Work Vivo? I don't mean you as a business per se, but in terms of how people are using it, where did it kind of step in? How valuable has it been for people to actually really engage with it? Have you seen the usage go up, go down, whatever?
Yeah, great question, John. Yeah, we have seen usage increase quite significantly during the pandemic. We've also had a lot of interest from companies who, because this move to a distributed workforce happened virtually over, in fact, no, not even virtually, it happened
overnight. Yeah.
It happened over a massive swathe of employees within an organization. Now, we saw signs, I think everybody saw signs of the move to remote working was in progress anyway, but this was massively accelerated. And there are people who, are accustomed to or like working independently, working from home. And there are some people who really don't, and all of them were forced into this situation. So organizations were faced with this unique dilemma that they had to accommodate a different working environment for many, many different types of employees. It was no longer enough to say, no, everyone's in the office. And everyone's working situation is different at home, especially during a pandemic like this. So what we heard from our customers was, they really needed to understand, like, more than ever, the pulse of the employees, check in on people. How are you doing? Also, because those kind of individual, like one-to-one conversations on a personal basis that happens in the workplace weren't able to happen anymore, despite the fact that people did have Zoom quizzes and stuff like that. That personal kind of dialogue that knits people together was missing in this distributed environment. So we actually saw the utility of the platform increase significantly. And when we look at what people are doing, sure, they were sharing information from a professional perspective. Executives and senior leaders were using it to have more transparency through the organization as to what's happening on a daily basis because of the pandemic. But we saw, for example, a DIY retail chain in Ireland called Woodies. 60% of their workforce were furloughed. They couldn't work in the retail stores.
Right.
None of those guys have emails, email addresses, or devices. So how was Woody's HQ able to keep in touch with those guys? They use our app, right? They use our communication tool, and the interaction between senior management and the employees, and also through employees themselves, actually increased during COVID, because people needed to keep in touch. Yeah. So we kind of look at it as kind of the glue that knits the cultural fabric together of the organization during calamitous change like this. Because
it is interesting, in the sense that, to a large extent, prior to this pandemic happening, people would have said, oh yes, I quite like working from home, but I quite like working from home for part of the time, right? It's very different when I'm told, well, now you have to work at home all of the time. And that's a very, very different mindset that you create. And how did you see, if you look at that whole thing about the workplace that has changed, how do you see the workplace changing in the future?
Yeah, well, one thing's for sure, John, it is going to change, right? Yeah. From Silicon Valley companies not wanting to renew massive real estate costs in office space and making people work from home. I kind of look at, as we've gone through the COVID situation, it's not really been people working from home. It's been people working and having to work from home during the pandemic, right? There are many different personality types, and we've done webinars and written blogs on this, the psychology of the employee, right? There are many different personality types. Some, whether you're an extrovert or introvert, you like to work from home and you don't. I think ultimately the organizations that are going to really make a difference here going forward are those ones that provide flexibility, that provide optionality, that if you do want to work from home, you can. If you want to work in the office, we will provide that for you. And if you want a hybrid, which I suspect most people will go to, certainly for Work Vivo, we're moving to a hybrid situation now, where the default is working from home. Even way after COVID, we'll continue to do this. But if you, like, I'm in the office today, if you want to come to the office for a meeting, you can. So I think that, people will almost demand optionality because they've been forced to go through the situation. And for many people, it wasn't as bad, both employees and businesses. It wasn't this scary thing they thought it was.
No, it's interesting, because I was talking earlier this morning. I was talking to a very a multinational company, and they were saying that, in actual fact, what they have found in general, obviously it's a generalization, the productivity was good, things got done. It wasn't this kind of major drama and trauma that they actually saw from a business perspective. Yeah. But one of the things that I'm interested in from your perspective, looking at that, is that, one is actually getting the operational stuff, so the things that need to get done to keep the business ticking over. But a really critical part of any organization is the culture, right? So when you have people working remotely, how much more challenging is it to really create and sustain the culture that you really want to have? Because you don't have the benefit of having them in situ all of the time, where you can have perhaps a bigger influence.
Yeah, look, I look on, we talk about this a lot, and, I look on culture as a combination of, you have the culture of the business and the culture of the employee. And the culture of the employee is becoming more and more important now, because their working environment is changing. If you consider that the employee culture is kind of the collective psychology of the person, of the employees, then it's really, really important to make sure that you accommodate the different employee types that you have. For example, one of the things that we talk about a lot about during the pandemic was, for people working remotely, check in with people regularly, but don't check up on them. Yes. And make sure as a leader, you know the difference. And the challenge I think that we have today is leadership, all the way up to the executive table, have very little experience in this at all, because they're used to seeing people in the office all the time. Yeah. So I think that culture could be impacted. This could be a massive opportunity, because, as you say, I think certainly from my experience of late, we were even more productive working remotely than we were in the office. Mm-hmm. So this could, if you get it right and you get culture right, then you can attract and retain really good talent and make them really productive and also really creative as well. Mm. If you get it wrong and you do more of the checkup than you check in, if you make people feel paranoid and make them feel, and maybe inadvertently, but make them feel isolated, you will lose talent, and it's going to be very hard to, your brand will have a hard time trying to recover from that.
Because it's hard to get that balance right, isn't it? Because you do need I think you're right in what you say. You do need to check in with people more. But how do you actually do that without, as you say, people think that you're checking up on them and you're micromanaging? Because somebody I work with, and the feedback I was getting from her team was, God, she'd only leave me alone. I mean, she just kind of, she's micromanaging me. She doesn't trust me. And it was actually the lack of trust. And the intention on the boss's part was, I'm trying to stay in contact and I'm trying to stay in touch, but obviously wasn't quite getting the messaging quite right in that. So how do you get that balance right? Because it's tricky.
Yeah, it is. Look, it is really, really difficult. So we've talked to some of our customers, and they use lots of different techniques, right? Some of them are just have a very open conversation, and just say, like, is this, how are you doing? Are you comfortable with me calling you every day? Would you rather have a formal meeting every other day or something? Just because you also have to accommodate people's lives, especially now we've been forced to work from home. There could be people with 4 kids at home that are trying to juggle schoolwork and work. But what you don't want is an employee seeing the boss's number come up on the phone and a feeling of dread. That is the worst thing that could possibly happen. One of the things that some of our customers are employing is use the opportunity to show a little bit more humanity as a leader. So we find on our platform, we actually see some of the poster in the activity feeds, and we see all the way up to the CEO posting photos of the CEO with two kids on a lap trying to do some work, and showing that leaders are humans too, and they're going through some problems, and that kind of almost levels the playing field a little bit in terms of just the whole humanity of the situation, and that's definitely helped as well. Obviously, all the other things about doing the online quizzes and the bake sales and the competitions and stuff like that has definitely helped too, in terms of bringing a more kind of, a social balance that is in a face-to-face environment. It's a real challenge, John. I don't think there's any set answer to it. It's a case-by-case basis, but as long as you recognize it is.
And I mean, if you look at it from a broader perspective as a leader, I mean, okay, we're talking specifically here about kind of touching base and checking in with people, but what do you see as being the other challenges that leaders are facing as they come into this new working environment? Because as you say, okay, we're not exactly certain what it would look like, but one thing we do know for certain is that it won't be the same. So for leaders need to shift their approach, how they do things. So what are the big changes that you see that leaders need to adopt in order to be really effective in this new environment? Yeah,
I mean, I think that, some companies have a culture of presenteeism and being in the office and seeing people face to face and needing the eye contact and making sure that you gauge people's productivity and value by what you see them doing. You have to, as a leader, you almost have to kind of eradicate that from your mind and find other ways of kind of measuring progress and value. And I think also in the past, it was enough to walk through, let's say, an office environment and just, raise your hand and say hi to someone. You can't do that in a remote world. And let's face it, it is going to be an increasingly remote world. So I think that the way you interact with people, that kind of personal touch is going to be more and more important. Understanding the different personality types, whether it's, your character, your culture, your religion or whatever, is going to be more and more important. So understand the psychology of the person that works for you more than you have to in the past. Just get to know them a little bit more. Ask them questions about their family, their personal situation, etc. Because then when you're making an assessment in terms of how valuable and how productive and how important that employee is to the business and to your team, you're balancing that with things that you typically will try and guess from looking in someone's eyes in a workplace. You're getting it directly from the person because you're asking the question. I think that's one of the biggest things you need to do is to understand, and we talked a lot about this in the company, about the psychology of the team, the psychology of the individual.
That's the human connection, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Which is the big part of it. One of the things that I saw that you were quoting for some research done in NUI Galway that said that 83% of respondents would like to continue working from home. I was just curious, is that 83% would like to continue for working from home full-time or blend?
It's a blend. It's a blend. Right. That 83% of people that would like to have the option to work from home, and whether that's 4-1, 3-2, whatever, but have that optionality. I think that 83 would be a high number for people to work from home full time. And that was like, I've definitely found that. I have a 6-year-old at home, so I found that pretty taxing with schoolwork and etc. But to have the option, yeah, that 83 is, kind of maybe not surprising. People's work and life environment, is shared. I don't know about you, but I've certainly found that during lockdown, I've definitely been working more hours than I would have been in the office.
I think that's true of most people, actually, and I think it is interesting. But I also think that it's creating opportunity, isn't it? Because to a large extent, now if people are looking for roles, the fact that there is that flexibility and there is the acceptance of remote working, suddenly the opportunity, if you're looking for somebody, you can spread the net quite a lot wider.
Absolutely, and as an employee, you can also spread your
absolutely. So it works both ways.
Yeah, which makes it a real challenge for organizations to be able to acquire and retain talent, because the more talented the person is, the more options they will have. And if they do want to work from home part of the time or full time, you need to offer them that flexibility. In which case, then you could be working for a company anywhere in the world. I mean, that's a massive change to the global workforce, not just company by company basis.
And as you said, that's been a real accelerator, hasn't it? And during this, because working from home is not a new concept, but the COVID has been a real accelerator of that, to actually make it happen and to make it real.
I think that for me, it's the speed of the change, which literally was overnight, and the scope of it. It affected everybody, regardless of whether you have a propensity to work remotely or not. You had to work remotely. So, and that forced people who wouldn't probably have considered it, both from a company and from an employee perspective, that it forced them to have to consider it. And certainly the feedback that we're getting from our customers and partners is, wow, that wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Sorry, go ahead.
As you say, just one of the things really, really important that people don't really tend to consider is kind of like untapped creative potential of employees. It's part of the cultural consideration as well. But I think that giving people an environment where they feel more relaxed working, they don't have 2.5 hour commutes into the office every day. Not only could that person be more productive, but has a little bit more headspace to be a bit more creative. And with these new generations coming into the workforce now, where roles are not strictly defined in a box, that creativity could be the difference between a successful company and not.
Yeah. And looking at all of that, this new environment that we're talking about, where does WorkVivo really help a company to make this happen and to make it seamless?
Yeah, so I talked earlier about this kind of combination of personal and professional interaction. It's even more important in a distributed working environment, but also was important prior to this. That employees feel that their contribution is worthwhile, not just to the team, but to the company or the organization as a whole. And that's essentially what we do, right? We create community. We create transparency and communication across the organization, so that you now know what's happening in an office in Mumbai that you probably wouldn't have known before. That when when someone does something and posts that they've completed a project or closed a deal or whatever, they can link that to one of the values of the business. So people can see the values and goals of the organization. And when I say goals, I don't mean revenue goals or anything like that. I mean more kind of esoteric goals, that they can see that being lived day to day, rather than a poster in an office or something that the CEO recites at the town hall. And we've seen that the morale of the organization, the engagement with each other and with the business increase substantially by creating this feeling of community and being being part of something bigger than you are. And that was important in the office, but never more important now than when you're sitting in the spare bedroom at the back of your house feeling pretty isolated. Right. We knit together that feeling of community.
Okay. And for you talking to companies, I mean, I'm sure the question has been asked of you many, many times. Okay, so we do this, and we make the investment in it. How do we actually determine the return on the investment of actually implementing this platform?
It's interesting that in most cases, John, we don't necessarily need to kind of build a business case for investment in our platform. Very, very, very few times have prospects asked us to justify from a commercial perspective the investment. I think they experience the platform, right, which is very intuitive and almost it is enjoyable to use, and they just intuitively realize qualitatively that this will impact their organization. But when we do talk about measurable KPIs, then there are sentiment analyses. Our platform does it too, where we can measure the engagement employees through things like pulse surveys, etc. Employee acquisition, employee retention. It costs a lot to bring an employee up to speed and then have to lose them. Getting great talent can make you massively competitively different. So, all the regular kind of KPIs that you'd expect in talent management definitely apply to the platform.
Yeah, because certainly, I mean, and I know from working with lots of organizations globally, the challenge is attracting the talent, and excuse me, and then the challenge is retaining the talent. Yeah. And of course, if you can demonstrate that you're actually through engagement, and clearly engagement does improve the retention, and also if you can demonstrate the culture of the organization, which is embracing something like WorkVivo, that makes it culturally more attractive, then that does translate into bottom line.
It does. It does. It does. I mean, many of our customers, they use us as what they call an employee app, where you have your own branded application as part of the business, where you can at any point see what the CEO's doing, be in touch with the CFO or wherever. And, we're not talking email, we're not talking direct messaging. This is kind of social communication. And they use that as a recruitment sales tool to say that we will give you the power to interact with anybody in the organization, any resource you need, right at your fingertips on your mobile device. And it's a differentiator for companies.
So when you look down with WorkVivo, you've been around about 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, just past our 3-year anniversary.
So 3 years. So okay, so you're looking down the line. What are the big opportunities that you see for WorkVivo?
I talked earlier, John, about there is a myriad of different communication technologies out there. So you couple that with this need for engaged communication. So, kind of communication that, obviously people need to communicate. They need to communicate data, opinions, ideas, etc. But to do that in a way that engages people with themselves and with the business, we believe that is the future of the way people work going forward, especially in a distributed environment. We see there's an opportunity for a kind of a central kind of hub where all the activity kind of is centralized. And that hub has to be a place where people come back to time and time again. And we believe that is the social aspect of what we do. So if you can imagine, and many of our customers already do this, where every day the employee comes in the morning, logs into their machine, and the first thing they're presented with is the digital doorway. And from there, they can see what's going on in the organization, interact, commune with people, and also access all those resources like kind of document repositories and applications that they need. And this is the kind of doorway to the business. We see that consolidation of tools and simplicity of communication and engaged communication as being the future of how people work. And we very much plan to be at the helm of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, and to be completely transparent to everyone listening, it was I who reached out to WorkVivo. It wasn't the other way around, because I came across what you're doing. I was so impressed with what I saw and what I understood you were doing. And then I was even more impressed when I engaged with, had the conversation. I just think that what you're doing is phenomenal. I really do think that it's got a very big part to play in the organizational change that is facing every organization. And I think you just really captured the essence of what is needed in terms of the engagement, because that employee engagement is such, it's kind of one of these things easy to say, and it sounds like a kind of a broad set, but actually it's a really hard-nosed business issue that people need to grapple with.
It is, John, and it's very important for us, and we absolutely and humbly recognize that technology is not the only kind of solution to this, right? The organization needs to have the appetite to make the change, to recognize the need, and then technology like WorkVivo can absolutely help that happen in the long term. But you have to have the appetite to do it in the first place. And that's not lost on us. We're very well aware of that.
And I also think that, just going back to what we were saying earlier on a few minutes ago, that the competition for talent is getting greater and greater. So companies need to be getting a lot better at this, and I think a lot of companies are beginning to realize that. So I think you're pushing an open door. So Pete, before we wrap up, 2 questions that I ask everybody on the podcast. One is a book that has had a significant impact on them, what it is and what impact it had.
Okay, yeah. So we talked earlier about this. I don't know how many of your guests have business books as their latest book. I like business books, but I'm an avid business book reader. One of my favorite books that impacted me was The Power of Now by
yeah.
it's
fantastic book.
Yeah, it's a really good book, and I read it probably I'd say about 10 years ago now, and it was a game changer for me. It just made me kind of realize what's important, and how to kind of look after your mental health and reconnect with the spiritual part, because oftentimes in business you can get lost in numbers and beating the competition and closing deals and all of that, and really this gives you a book like that just gives you context of what's important.
Yeah, great book. Second question is daily rituals, if you have them, and what are they and what they do for you?
So obviously my daily ritual kind of got completely scuppered with COVID, but prior to that, it was I like to work out, and I go to the gym. I've just started to go back now actually, and I'm very sore at the moment. I also have a 6-year-old girl who likes to wake up very early, so that's definitely part of my ritual as well. So I'd say part of it is looking after a 6-year-old, going to the gym, and drinking at least 2 cups of coffee before I switch on the device.
Good man. Pete, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. How can people get in touch with you? We'll put everything in the show notes, but just if they're listening, how can they get in touch with you now?
Absolutely, John. Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed this. I really appreciate the conversation. It's a really interesting topic, and will be for some time to come. You can find us at workvivo.com. Go to the website. There you can get in touch with us, have a chat. We would love to show you the platform. What we typically do is to actually brand it in your corporate identity, so you can actually experience what it would look like. It just takes about 20 minutes for us to walk you through that. So yeah, workvivo.com, come and check us out.
Well, listen, thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll talk again real soon.
All right, John, thanks for your time, and I appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.